for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. I'm Darren Gibson. I'll be your host today. We have a lot of stories to cover, including some breaking news. WNBA star Brittney Griner has been released from Russia in a prisoner exchange. We'll mention a little bit about that. We also have to follow up with the railroad workers' strike that was averted by Congress and President Biden. Railroad workers are not very happy with Biden at the moment. We have an update to the plot to kidnap and murder Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. More trials are coming. We have an update to the Patrick Lyoya shooting out of Grand Rapids. A civil suit has been filed against the Grand Rapids Police Department and the now fired officer in that shooting. We also have to talk about the congressional gold medals that were awarded to several officers from January 6th, and we'll talk about the snub by Brian Sicknick's family. And as part of that, we have a Hammer Time segment with the most amount of winners ever, 21. This will be a short segment, though, because I'm going to go through them real fast. So before we get to today's topics, a couple of reminders that you can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us on Twitter at Southpaws Radio. You can follow us on Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. You can follow us on YouTube by doing a search for Southpaws Radio. And you can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime at Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Podcast Addict, Podvine, and Pandora by doing a search for Southpaws. Once you found our logo, you found us. We send links to our weekly episodes to our Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, and YouTube accounts. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern. And you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations, including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, KZGM in Kabul, Missouri, and KEPJ in San Antonio, Texas. Be sure to listen to us on your local Pacifica station. We're recording this episode on Thursday, December 8th, 2022. At about 8 o'clock this morning was when I received the first alert from CBS News that Brittney Griner, the WNBA star who has been held captive in Russia over marijuana drops, one of those vape cartridges that had marijuana oil in it, she was released from custody in exchange for a Russian weapons trafficker, I guess for lack of a better word. Here's the thing about this. Paul Whelan, who is an American citizen, former Marine businessman, is still in Russia. Now, why wasn't he released? Well, apparently from what the White House is saying is that Russia wanted to trade him for a Russian spy that they believe that the U.S. has in custody. Of course, the U.S. claiming, no, we don't have any spies in custody here. Yeah. I hate to say that I don't believe anything that they say, but I just don't believe anything they have to say when it comes to we don't have any spies here. So in any event, Griner is free. Whelan is still in prison. They're still looking to try and get him out. And there's been a lot of consternation, not only from conservatives, but from progressives as well, about Griner getting released, but not Paul Whelan. We will talk more about this in depth on next week's show because we'll have some more details. This is a breaking news story still as of press time as we go to air. So we will have more about the release of Brittney Griner, and I'll just say this. This should be the wake-up call to everybody around the world. Don't travel to Russia. I don't care. Oh, it's beautiful over there. No. Do not travel to countries that have dictators in office, because you don't know what's going to happen over there. That's Russia, that's China, that's North Korea, that's any of these tin pot dictators that think they're going to control everybody. No, don't do it. Don't go to these countries. Then you won't have to worry about the U.S. State Department trying to get you out of a mess that you got in either because of your own fault or through no fault of your own. Either way, it really is that simple. And yeah, I know the story, if WNBA players were paid more, they wouldn't have to travel to the European leagues. Well, yeah, that needs to be addressed too. But the European leagues ought to know better. Don't travel to countries that have dictatorships like Russia. Speaking of traveling, let's talk about the railroad worker strike that was averted by Congress and President Biden. And like I said, the railroad workers are pissed. I have this story. This is Mike Ludwig writing for Truth Out. This is dated December 3rd. Railroad workers lashed out at both Republicans and Democrats on Friday after Congress and President Joe Biden blocked their unions from striking over paid sick leave and unsafe work scheduling, with militant workers calling for the various railroad craft unions to unite under one organization and consider allying with a third political party. Here's my suggestion. Go talk to the folks at the Green Party. They could use your help, not just with money, but with people, with actual bodies to help get the word out. Biden signed legislation on Friday finalizing a labor agreement with rail carrier companies that multiple unions representing more than half of railroad workers rejected in November after 2 years of bitter negotiations. Biden bills himself as a valiant supporter of organized labor, but the holiday shopping season loomed over his decision to buck the rail unions, with the president warning on Friday of a, quote, economic catastrophe at a very bad time of the calendar, end of quote, before changing the subject to boast about job gains and lower gasoline prices. Which, by the way, the president, regardless of who it is, doesn't have anything to do with gasoline prices. You know who does? OPEC. OPEC does. The traders do. Right there's the problem. The rich people control it. And that needs to change. I keep saying, eat the rich. Literally, boil them, eat them. Marilee Taylor, a labor organizer and recently retired locomotive engineer, said in an interview, quote, I think many trade unionists with any experience would see this for what it is. This is Reaganomics in action. This is the Reaganomics with the face of Joe Biden, end of quote. You know what? She's correct. Taylor, who worked on freight trains for 28 years, recalled Ronald Reagan's controversial decision in 1981 to bust a strike called by air traffic controllers by stepping in and firing 11,000 union members from their jobs. Yeah, and that backfired because the air traffic controllers reorganized a union in 1987 called the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, and they're affiliated with the AFL-CIO. That gives them bigger bargaining power. Taylor and other workers say claims by Biden and industry groups that a strike or work slowdown would inevitably cause widespread economic damage are overblown. The point of a strike is to leverage collective power and win concessions from profit-hungry employers, not to spend weeks without a paycheck. Retailers are prepared for supply chain logjams, and the vice president of the Retail Industry Leaders Association recently said, quote, we will still have Christmas this year, end of quote, if railroad unions call a strike. The greater threat, railroad unions argue, is workers on the job for days at a time without sufficient time off to see a doctor or recover from illness as the nation continues to face COVID-19 and other viruses. In June, a locomotive engineer died of a heart attack on the job after missing a doctor's appointment to avoid being penalized by BNSF, a major rail carrier company. By the way, BNSF, Burlington Northern Santa Fe, is owned by Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world. He can afford to pay them time off. Most rail workers do not have paid sick leave or flexible work schedules and can be penalized for missing work. And Taylor said workers are exhausted and looking for other jobs. House Democrats passed separate legislation adding 7 days of sick leave to the deal, but the companion bill failed in the Senate after 42 Republicans and one lone Democrat, Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, voted against it. Let me just tell you, Joe Manchin is a dino. I'll go further. He's a Republican. Period. He is. Look at his voting record. He doesn't give a f*** about workers. And the sooner that you people start to wake up and see it, smell the brew, time to wake up, the sooner you do it, the better off you'll be. Jason Doring, General Secretary of Railroad Workers United, an independent advocacy group of union members, said the 1-2 punch from both political parties is despicable. In a statement Friday, Doring said, quote, "Politicians are happy to voice platitudes and heap praise upon us for our heroism throughout the pandemic, the essential nature of our work, the difficult and dangerous and demanding conditions of our jobs. Yet when the steel hits the rail, they back the powerful and wealthy Class 1 rail carriers every time." End of quote. It's like Carlin said, the rich don't give a f*** about you. They really don't. Again, it is time, beyond time, to wake up. Smell it. Smell the brew. It's on. You better do it. You better do it now. Better figure it out now. I can't believe people are so stupid. It's unreal. Let me continue the story. Smart TD, which is the International Association of Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Workers Transportation Division, one of the rail unions that voted against the labor agreement, said workers are demanding paid sick leave out of necessity, not preference. Everyday railroad workers must decide between showing up to work sick and stressed out or facing penalties from employers. The leadership of Smart TD said in a statement Thursday, quote, "It is extremely disappointing that 43 senators voted to prioritize the corporate greed of rail carriers and CEOs over the needs and quality of life improvements that our members so desperately deserve." End of quote. The Smart TD union, reserving its ire for Manchin and the GOP, thanked Biden and other top Democrats for negotiating in support of railroad workers at the negotiating table and in Congress. Federal law allows Congress to intervene in a rail strike, and the White House joined negotiations between workers and rail bosses earlier this year after at least 2 rail unions voted to strike, resulting in a series of temporary agreements. And I'm going to stop right there. That federal law, in my eyes, is illegal. It's a violation of the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law. You're restricting their free speech, their right to assemble, their right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. It is an illegal law. And as far as I'm concerned, railroad workers need to wildcat strike now. They should have walked out the minute that Biden touched pen to paper and signed it into law. That's when they should have all just said, you know what? F this shit. We're done. And walk out. Because it's going to happen, folks. They keep warning you. People are leaving the industry in droves. They can't handle it anymore. Are you going to listen? Unreal. Averting a strike and any economic consequences ahead of the midterm elections was a top priority for Biden and the Democrats. However, Taylor said the final agreement forced by Congress and the White House provides concessions to rail bosses who are determined to maintain precision scheduled railroading, a work scheduling policy that many workers loathe for prioritizing cost-cutting and shareholder returns over the safety and well-being of workers. Taylor said, quote, "Good hard workers with experience and capability are saying, I have to have a life, I have to be with my family for some time of the day, I have to have time for my health." End of quote. Biden said he is a longtime supporter of paid sick leave and pledged to continue fighting for sick leave for railroad workers, but he did not propose any legislation or offer executive action. And that's the thing. Biden can sign an executive order. You will give these workers paid time off, period. He can do that. As reporters shouted questions about paid sick leave, Biden appeared to say that Republicans should see the light before exiting the White House briefing room on Friday. No, Democrats need to see the light too, because they're just as anti-worker, these corporate-owned limousine liberals like Joe Manchin, like Kyrsten Sinema. They need to wake up. They really do. We need a country full of Bernie Sanders. We really do. We're beyond time for that. It's either now or never. Biden presented the decision as a difficult choice, but the right one for protecting the broader economy ahead of the holidays. F*** the economy. Really? I don't care. Let the rich suffer. We've suffered enough for too long. They need to suffer too. Union members saw a president who simply sided with the bosses. Taylor said a truly pro-labor president would have vetoed the bill or refused to sign it until carriers commit to paid sick leave and use the bully pulpit to blame the industry and its Wall Street shareholders for refusing to concede its inhumane scheduling policies if the dispute ultimately shut down the rails. There you go. That's what needed to happen, and it didn't, because Biden is owned by the oligarchs, by the rich. Owned. O-W-N-E-D. Owned. Taylor said, quote, Biden has just done one of the most undemocratic, anti-worker, and across-the-board anti-labor actions by, first of all, promoting governmental state intervention in these negotiations. End of quote. Taylor added that essential workers in education and health care now see that their right to strike is threatened both by the state and a Democratic president. Still, Biden would have his political cake and eat it too had Manchin and a handful of Republicans voted in favor of paid sick leave for railroad workers. In a statement, Railroad Workers United said fellow workers should explore other political options now the politicians in both major parties failed to have their backs. Railroad workers are currently represented by a web of roughly a dozen craft unions, and workers should consider uniting under one powerful union, the group said. The group has also proposed a public takeover of the rails to break the grip of private companies. That I can get behind. I can get behind both of them. Ron Kamenkow, a locomotive engineer and organizer with Railroad Workers United, said politicians and union leaders have played railroad workers for more than a century under a broken system upheld by ancient federal laws. In a statement released Friday, Kamenkow said, quote, the fiasco of recent months will show that perhaps the time has come for railroad workers to push for a unified and powerful labor organization of all crafts together with a political party that will better serve the interest of not just railroad workers, but all working class people. End of quote. I applaud them for that. That's what needs to happen. There needs to be an actual labor party in this country that is strong on labor rights, unionizing, single-payer universal health care, guaranteed time off. Hell, let's drop the 40-hour work week and let's get it to 32. Hey, I'm all for it. And if you call yourself a progressive and you're not for any of this, then you're not an actual progressive, as Jack and I said on last week's show. All right, before my blood pressure gets too high, let's go to our next story here. This is an update on the plotters that organized to kidnap and murder Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer over her COVID-19 policies. This story is by John Flesher with the Associated Press. This is dated December 7th out of Traverse City, Michigan. 5 men were turned over for trial Wednesday on charges involving a foiled plot to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Michael Knoll, William Knoll, Eric Molitor, and Sean Fix, all from Michigan, are accused of providing material support for terrorist acts as well as a gun crime. Brian Higgins of Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin, was charged with the providing material support count. Judge Michael Stepka ruled that evidence presented in a preliminary hearing justified a trial in Antrim County where Whitmer's Elk Rapids vacation home is located, and prosecutors say the abduction was to happen. They say 4 of the defendants scouted the house and surroundings, and there was talk of blowing up a bridge to keep police from responding. 14 people, 6 in federal court and 8 in state courts, were arrested in October 2020 and charged with backing the scheme. FBI agent Hank Impola testified during the 4-day hearing in August that it's a, quote, version of anarchy, end of quote. He described some participants as members of self-styled militia groups favoring violent rebellion against the government, known as the Boogaloo Movement, the Boogaloo Boys. Adam Fox and Barry Croft Jr., described as ringleaders, were convicted of conspiracy in federal court on August 23rd. Ty Garbin and Caleb Franks earlier pleaded guilty, while Daniel Harris and Brandon Caserta were acquitted at trial in April. In a related state case, Joe Morrison, his father-in-law Pete Musico, and Paul Beller were found guilty in October of supplying material support for a terrorist act as members of a group known as the Wolverine Watchmen. The Knoll brothers, Higgins and Molitor, joined trips to inspect Whitmer's house from outside, while Fix helped them find it, according to evidence presented at the state hearing. All 5 joined meetings and paramilitary training sessions at which the plot was discussed. That's according to a court filing from the Michigan Attorney General's office. The brief said that the conspiracy evolved from targeting law enforcement to, quote, politicians in general, and lastly, a plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer, end of quote. It said each defendant made statements recorded in audio, video, or online chat conversations that had, quote, the singular purpose of advocating the Boogaloo ideology with the goal of seeing civil war erupt in the United States and the overthrow of existing governments, end of quote. Defense attorneys said during the hearing that some of the recordings came from third parties and couldn't be trusted. Well, I tell you what there. I think you can trust them. Yeah, you want to know what needs to happen to these traitors? That's what I call them, because that's what they are. Evil, violent, conservative traitors. They need to do what Germany did. I'm going to get to this story. This is Frank Jordan's writing for the Associated Press. This is dated December 7th out of Berlin. German police seized dozens of people, including a self-styled prince, a retired paratrooper, and a former judge on Wednesday, accusing the suspects of discussing the violent overthrow of the government, but leaving unclear how concrete the plans were. A German official and a lawmaker said that investigators may have detected real plotting, drunken fantasizing, or both. Regardless, Germany takes any right-wing threat seriously, and thousands of police officers carried out pre-dawn raids across much of the country. Government spokesman Stefan Heberstreet said, quote, we're talking about a group that, according to what we know so far, planned to violently abolish our democratic state of law and an armed attack, end of quote, on the German parliament building. Sarah Nani, a lawmaker with the Green Party, part of the German government, suggested the group may not have been capable. In a post on the social network Mastodon, Nani said, quote, more details keep coming to light that raise doubts about whether these people were even clever enough to plan and carry out such a coup. The fact is, no matter how crude their ideas are and how hopeless their plans, even the attempt is dangerous. End of quote. Federal prosecutors said the group is alleged to have believed in a, quote, conglomerate of conspiracy theories consisting of narratives from the so-called Reich citizens, as well as QAnon ideology, end of quote. Cuckoo, cuckoo. Adherents of the Reich Citizens Movement reject Germany's post-war constitution and have called for bringing down the government, while QAnon is a global conspiracy theory with roots in the United States. The Reich Citizens has been under observation by Germany's domestic intelligence agency since 2016. Authorities estimate that the loose-knit movement has about 21,000 adherents. Prosecutors said the suspects also believe Germany is ruled by a so-called deep state. Gee, where have we heard this before? Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the start of this, folks. I keep telling you this. Better believe me. Better do it. One of the alleged ringleaders arrested Wednesday is Heinrich the 13th Prince Rus, a 71-year-old member of the House of Rus who continues to use the title despite Germany abolishing any formal role for royalty more than a century ago. Federal prosecutors said Rus, whom the group planned to install as Germany's new leader, had contacted Russian officials with the aim of imposing a new order in the country once the German government was overthrown. There is no indication that the Russians responded positively. Police also detained Birgit Malasak-Winkman, a judge and former lawmaker with the far-right Alternative for Germany party. Alternative for Germany, which is known by its acronym AfD, has increasingly come under scrutiny by security services due to its ties with extremists. AfD's co-leaders Tino Kruppala and Alice Weidel said they had only learned of the alleged coup plans through the media and condemned them. They said in a statement, quote, "We have full confidence in the authorities involved and demand a swift and comprehensive investigation," end of quote. Chief Federal Prosecutor Peter Frank said some 3,000 officers were involved in the raids conducted at 150 sites in 11 of Germany's 16 states. Officers detained 22 German citizens on suspicion of membership in a terrorist organization, according to prosecutors. 3 other people, including a Russian citizen, were held on suspicion of supporting the organization. Another 27 people were under investigation. One of those arrested was a soldier serving on the support staff for Germany's Special Forces Unit KSK in the southwestern town of Kaul. The unit has received scrutiny over what officials called some soldiers' far-right beliefs. Along with detentions in Germany, prosecutors said one person was detained in the Austrian town of Kitzbühel and another in Italy. The latter suspect, a 64-year-old German citizen who is a former officer in the German Army Special Forces, is accused of being part of a criminal organization that aimed to, quote, "subvert the German democratic order by any means, including criminal, and replace it with another unidentified form of state," end of quote. That was a police statement. Police added that extradition proceedings are underway. German Justice Minister Marco Buschmann said, quote, "Of course, there are many people who grandstand and tell confused tales stories after drinking alcohol. In this case, however, there were such strong suspicions that the group wanted to take violent action that the investigating judge at the federal Supreme Court ordered the investigative measures to be taken," end of quote. Well, that's a good thing they did that. I wish they'd do it here. Some of the group's members had made concrete preparations to storm Germany's federal parliament with a small armed group, according to prosecutors. Interior Minister Nancy Faeser said that Wednesday's raids showed that, quote, "we know how to defend ourselves with full force against the enemies of democracy," end of quote. Well, that they did. Faeser added, quote, "the investigation offers an insight into the depths of the terrorist threat within the Reich citizens' milieu. Only the further investigation will provide a clear picture of how far the coup plans had come," end of quote. Officials have repeatedly warned that far-right extremists pose the biggest threat to Germany's domestic security. This threat was highlighted by the killing of a regional politician and the deadly attack on a synagogue in 2019. A year later, far-right extremists taking part in a protest against the country's pandemic restrictions tried and failed to storm the Bundestag building in Berlin. Faeser announced this year that the government planned to disarm about 1,500 suspected extremists and to tighten background checks for those wanting to acquire guns as part of a broader crackdown on the far right. And that's great news. And that's what needs to happen here. It really does, folks. Let's go to our next story. This is an update on the murder of Patrick Lyoya by a now former Grand Rapids, Michigan police officer. He was fired after he was charged with second-degree murder. This story is from Rachel Van Gilder at Wood Television. This is dated December 7th. Patrick Lyoya's family has sued the city of Grand Rapids and the former police officer who killed Lyoya, alleging excessive force and a violation of his rights. The 12-page civil lawsuit was filed by Lyoya's father on behalf of his estate in federal court on Wednesday. It accuses former Grand Rapids Police Department officer Christopher Schur of violating Lyoya's Fourth Amendment protections against excessive force and of gross negligence and willful and wanton misconduct under state law. Attorney Ven Johnson said in a statement, quote, "It's clear that Schur unnecessarily escalated a situation involving an unarmed black man. At no point did Patrick try to hit, punch, kick, or slap Schur, nor did Patrick ever verbally threaten him. Any claim by Schur that he was in imminent fear for his life is absolutely unreasonable and untrue." End of quote. The suit also argues that the city of Grand Rapids violated Lyoya's federal civil rights by failing to properly train its officers and by failing to correctly discipline officers after complaints. A press release from Ven Johnson and famed civil rights attorney Ben Crump, who is also representing the family, said in part, quote, "As for the city of Grand Rapids, the Lyoya family claims that the city is liable for federal law and more violations in that it created the atmosphere at GRPD which influenced Schur to use excessive force on Lyoya." End of quote. Grand Rapids Police has been the subject of an investigation by the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, and the state ultimately filed 2 discrimination charges against the department. The investigation was started in 2019. The charges came after Lyoya's death, and neither involve his case. The suit claims that the city has a policy, practice, procedure, protocol, and or custom that demonstrates deliberate indifference to the rights of the plaintiff and was the cause and moving force behind the violations and harm suffered. As an example, the lawsuit said that in 79 excessive force complaints by citizens against the Grand Rapids Police, all but 2 officers were cleared. The suit reads, quote, "Tragically and predictably, city's unconstitutional policies, procedures, protocols, and customs are moving the force behind the constitutional violations complained of here and Patrick's death." End of quote. In a short statement provided to Wood Television Wednesday, the city said it had not yet been served with the lawsuit. The statement reads in part, quote, "We have not yet received the lawsuit and are unable to address the specifics. Upon receipt, we will review the lawsuit and respond appropriately in court." End of quote. The suit requests a jury trial and seeks punitive damages, attorney's fees, and other expenses. Though the lawsuit documents do not list a specific dollar amount, Crump called it a $100 million suit. The case was assigned to Judge Paul Maloney, U.S. District Court, Western District Judge in Kalamazoo. Yeah, and that's what I have been advocating for the last 10 years on this show. Whenever there's a lawsuit, you need to go for $100 million or more. That's the only way you're going to fix this problem, is by forcing him to cough up the money. Oh, but the taxpayers suffer. Well, then the taxpayers need to complain louder about it. Maybe things will change then. Through an English interpreter, Patrick Lyoya's father, Peter, said of his son's death, quote, "The pain is so deep, the bitterness is so deep. Every time when I sleep during the night, I will dream how my son was shot in the back of the head, and I will see my son. That bitterness is still in me." End of quote. He said he hopes for justice for his son and that the case will prevent other families from experiencing what his is going through. Through an interpreter, Peter Lyoya said, quote, "What was so amazing to me is that after Patrick was shot, I thought that his officer, Schur, the criminal, would be arrested. Amazingly, the man is still free, is at home with his wife and his children, and my son is buried and Patrick is dead." End of quote. Schur remains out of jail on bond. He is charged with second-degree murder for the killing of the 26-year-old Patrick Lyoya during a traffic stop on April 4th. Video shows Lyoya ran away, and there was a struggle that included Lyoya grabbing Schur's taser. The taser never made contact with either man. The video shows the Schur, who was on top of Lyoya trying to hold him down, shot Lyoya in the back of the head. At the news conference, Johnson replayed the video that Grand Rapids police previously released. When it showed Schur fire the fatal shot, Lyoya's father shook his head and wiped away tears. Claiming inappropriate, excessive, and inexcusable use of force in the civil suit, Lyoya's attorneys alleged Schur pulled Lyoya over unlawfully, failed to de-escalate the situation, didn't wait for backup before engaging Lyoya, and drew his taser while too close to Lyoya. Johnson argued that Schur should have radioed for backup as soon as Lyoya stepped away from him, and that rather than struggling with him, Schur should have backed off, waited for more officers to arrive, and just let Lyoya run. Johnson said, quote, "You have the car, you have the front seat passenger, the keys are still in it, you don't need to engage. That's what de-escalation is all about," end of quote. The lawsuit reads in part, quote, "Schur knew that after the second deployment his taser could only be used as a drive stun, yet he pinned Patrick to the ground using his full body weight on Patrick's back," end of quote. The lawsuit adds that Schur didn't warn Lyoya before using the taser or shooting him. Johnson said, quote, "Under federal law, you have to give someone a warning, if feasible, if possible, which clearly it was possible here, before you shoot them dead. In this case, not only is our client on the ground, he's not pointing the taser at Schur when Schur blows his head off," end of quote. Johnson then turned to Lyoya's father and said, quote, "Sorry, Peter," end of quote. The suit argues it was objectively unreasonable for Schur to shoot Lyoya. Ben Crump said, quote, "This is so unnecessary. It is so unnecessary that Patrick Lyoya was shot in the back of the head by former officer Schur," end of quote. Schur's defense team argues he acted in self-defense and in accordance with Grand Rapids police policy. In October, Schur was ordered to stand trial for second-degree murder. No trial date has been set yet. Well, hopefully that happens very soon. Let's go to our next story here. This is Libby Cathy writing for ABC News. This is dated December 6th. Top lawmakers on Tuesday presented police officers who defended the Capitol on January 6, 2021 with congressional gold medals, the highest honor that Congress can bestow nearly 2 years after the attack. For many officers honored, the Rotunda ceremony marked the first time since January 6th that they've returned to the Capitol complex. Chief Robert Conti of the Metropolitan Police Department said, quote, "Many of us still carry the physical, mental, and emotional scars after that mob of thousands launched a violent assault in an attempt to halt the counting of electoral ballots. The sound of metal poles and other objects striking the bodies, helmets, and shields may still ring loudly. The air still thick with bear spray and other chemicals, making it difficult for our officers to see and breathe. The calls for your fellow officer to be harmed just as loud as the day that this occurred." End of quote. Speaking directly to the scores of police present, Conti added, quote, "But there is hope, because through adversity comes growth, and we continue to grow together and deliver excellence to our community. Defending the U.S. Capitol is something that you will carry with you for the rest of your careers and lives. Regardless of your political affiliation, you responded like you do each and every day, without hesitation, with courage, and an unwavering duty to uphold your oath. You did not give up, and you did not give in." End of quote. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, in one of her final ceremonial acts in leadership, was the first to deliver remarks of the top 4 congressional leaders, all of whom were present. She recalled January 6th, in which a mob overran law enforcement and stormed the Capitol to try and prevent the certification of Donald Trump's election loss, as a, quote, "day of horror and heartbreak," end of quote, but also a, quote, "moment of extraordinary heroism," end of quote. Pelosi said, quote, "Exactly 23 months ago, our nation suffered the most staggering assault on democracy since the Civil War. Staring down deadly violence and despicable bigotry, our law enforcement officers bravely stood in the breach, ensuring that democracy survived on that dark day. So on behalf of the United States Congress and the American people, it is my honor to present the Congressional Gold Medal to the United States Capitol Police, the Metropolitan Police, and every hero of January 6th, End of quote. U.S. Capitol Police Chief Tom Manger said for his officers that it was a day, quote, defined by chaos, courage, tragic loss, and resolve, end of quote. Referring to 3 police who died in the days and months after January 6th, Manger said, quote, I especially want to recognize our officers who made the ultimate sacrifice. Officer Brian Sicknick, Officer Howard Liebengood. Now I want to recognize also Officer Billy Evans, who was lost on the line of duty on April 2nd, 2021, when he was attacked outside the Capitol by a lone assailant. I appreciate the fact that Congress is acknowledging the courage, the strength, and resiliency of each and every member of the United States Capitol Police, sworn and civilian. End of quote. Conti, speaking for the Metropolitan Police, thanked, quote, all that voted in favor of this recognition, end of quote. While the Senate passed legislation last year to grant the medals unanimously with a voice vote, 21 House Republicans voted against it, and we'll get to that in just a couple of minutes. The ceremony arrived as Democrats raced to finish a nearly 18-month investigation by a House Select Committee probing the attack amid discussion of criminal referrals to the Justice Department ahead of Republicans taking back the House majority in January. Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, the likely incoming House Speaker, has signaled that he would not like to see the Select Committee kept in place and instead hold hearings about security lapses that led to the breach. McCarthy on Tuesday joined in calling the officers heroes. McCarthy said, quote, heroes who live out the code to protect and serve, heroes who do the noble work. Too many people take that for granted, but days like today force us to realize how much we owe them that thin blue line. We're forever indebted to them for their heroism. End of quote. God, that just makes me nauseous thinking about what he said. It really does, folks. It's ridiculous. Because he doesn't care. He really doesn't. Gladys Sicknick, the mother of Brian Sicknick, appeared to pass over McCarthy and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell in a handshake line with congressional leaders. She had lobbied Congress to pass legislation for a bipartisan select commission to investigate January 6th, which Republicans in the Senate ultimately blocked. Speaking with reporters, she called both McCarthy and McConnell, quote, just two-faced, end of quote. She added, quote, I'm just tired of them standing there and saying how wonderful the Capitol Police is and then turn around and go down to Mar-a-Lago and kiss his ring and come back. It hurts. It just hurts. End of quote. And I'll just add this. They're not going down there to kiss his ring. They're kissing his ass. They really are. They got orange on their face from kissing his orange ass. Sorry, I'm just going to be blunt about it like I have been for over 10 years now on the air. I don't care. When asked why Sicknick's family did not shake his hand, McCarthy told ABC News after the ceremony, quote, I don't know. I was holding something. End of quote. Yeah, I know what you're holding. You're holding your dick in your hands. That's about what it is, too. They sit there and they say, we support the cops, but they vote against it. And again, we'll get to that in just a minute here. Later, asked about it at his weekly news conference, McConnell said, quote, I would respond by saying today we gave the gold medal to the heroes of January 6th. We admire and respect them. They laid their lives on the line, and that's why we gave a gold medal today to the heroes of January 6th. End of quote. In his remarks at the ceremony, McConnell called law enforcement officers at the Capitol, quote, familiar colleagues, the first faces we see on our way in each morning and our last goodbyes every night. End of quote. McConnell told the officers present at the ceremony, quote, because you honored your oath to support and defend the Constitution, we were able to honor ours. That is a reality that was made especially clear 23 months ago, but it is true every single day. Thank you for having our backs. Thank you for saving our country. Thank you for being not just our friends, but our heroes. End of quote. When President Joe Biden signed legislation to grant the medals last year, he said that one would be placed at the Smithsonian Museum, quote, so all visitors can understand what happened that day. End of quote. Medals will also be placed at the Capitol, at the U.S. Capitol Police Headquarters, and at the Metropolitan Police Department. At a Rose Garden ceremony last summer, Biden said, quote, "We cannot allow history to be rewritten. We cannot allow the heroism of these officers to be forgotten. We have to understand what happened, the honest and unvarnished truth. We have to face it." End of quote. He's absolutely right about that. And so with that on our minds, let's go ahead to our next segment.
Stop! Hammer time!
Oh yeah, it's hammer time. It is time to drop the hammer on the douchebag of the week. We've got 21 of them, folks. It is a record now. The 21 are the 21 Republicans who voted against the bill to honor those police officers with the Congressional Medal. They are, in no particular order, Lauren Boebert of Colorado, Q-Coo, John Rose of Tennessee, Andy Harris of Maryland, Thomas Massey of Kentucky, Bob Good of Virginia, Louis Gohmert of Texas, Q-Coo, Barry Moore of Alabama, Ralph Norman of South Carolina, Matt Rosendale of Montana, Marjorie Trader Green of Georgia, Q-Coo, Chip Roy of Texas, Paul Gosar of Arizona, Q-Coo, Andy Biggs of Arizona, Warren Davidson of Ohio, Scott Perry of Pennsylvania, Matt Gaetz of Florida, Q-Coo, Greg Steube of Florida, Andrew Clyde of Georgia, Jody Heiss of Georgia, Mary Miller of Illinois, and Michael Cloud of Texas. So, to all 21 of you traitors, we have this message for you.
Don't be a douchebag!
Yeah, you got that right. All 21. It's even 21 in blackjack. Does that mean I win? If I win, I want to give back the winnings, because screw them. 21 douchebags. It is a record now. Officially a record. I want to get to a disturbing story out of Houston, Texas. This is KTRK Television. The reporter is Jessica Willey. This is dated Tuesday, December 6th, out of Houston. Houston police and fire department personnel responded to the home of Senator Ted Cruz Tuesday night. Houston Police Department told Eyewitness News that officers responded to reports of a 14-year-old with self-inflicted stab wounds on the arms in the upscale neighborhood of River Oaks. Police were in the front yard of Cruz's home when KTRK arrived. The teen was taken to the hospital. Police could not say whether the call involved a member of Cruz's family. The Texas Republican has 2 daughters. We can now confirm that it was a member of Ted Cruz's family, his oldest daughter. KTRK reached out to Senator Ted Cruz's office for comment. Representatives said the police activity involved a family member. Regarding a question about one of the senator's daughters, they said that she is okay. There were no serious injuries. Right now, I want to play audio from a TikTok video that was posted by Caroline Cruz, Ted Cruz's oldest daughter, where she addresses that she is going through some mental health issues and that speculation by the media as to what's going on isn't helping her. Please take a listen to her words.
Hey, I wanted to address this on my own because the media is completely altering the story and causing my mental health to be exploited for their gain. Honestly, I think it's sick that they're using a 14-year-old as a publicity tool. I also don't enjoy the assumptions on why I did what I did. No, it had nothing to do with my sexuality or my father. I'm not suicidal, but I am experiencing some mental issues, and I'm working through it and getting the help I need. Thank you so much for all the support and love. It means a lot to me. But the most traumatizing part of this experience is how public it's been. I'm feeling a lot better, and I'm so happy to have a great support system, but I would prefer if y'all didn't make bold statements about what this is when you truly have no idea what is going on.
I can sympathize with her because I have been so very public about my mental health issues in the past, and I would like to address something that she said about the media. Yes, it's true that speculation isn't helping her. However, as a member of the media, I do have to say that this is a public issue. And there have been people on social media that have criticized the media for even covering this story. As somebody who has been a part of the media for over 30 years off and on, let me give you a little bit of background into the decision-making when it comes to covering stories like this. Typically, the media will not cover any stories involving attempts of suicide or successful suicide, with the following exceptions: that the person is a public figure or a family member of a public figure. I have been very public about my mental health struggles. Not everybody can do that. I do that for two reasons. One, to tell my story, and two, to let anybody else that's going through anything similar to what I have, that you're not alone. I don't want to get into the Cruz family business. I'll just give this piece of advice to her dad. Maybe you need to step away from office. Maybe you need to take some time off and focus on your family and focus on getting your oldest daughter well. I can't say that as a father because I've never been a father and I'm never going to be a father. But if I was a parent and I had a child that was going through mental health issues, I would drop everything and I would focus all of my attention on getting my family member well. Family is more important than any job, whether you're a ditch digger, whether you work in a restaurant, whether you're a member of Congress. I hope Senator Cruz is hearing my words and is taking them to heart. But I also want to send this message out to Caroline Cruz. You're not alone, and I'm glad that you're getting the help that you need. If you don't feel like the help that you're getting is making you feel better, please be your own advocate or have someone advocate on your behalf and get help that works, and don't stop trying to find help. If you're having mental health struggles, realize you're not alone. There's help available. Please seek help. It doesn't matter about cost. There is help available. Ask for help. If you're having problems navigating the system, ask somebody who's a part of the system to help you navigate it. And if you're in a mental health crisis, please call 988 and get help. I want to get to our final story. This is Emily Heil writing for the Washington Post. This is dated December 6th. A restaurant in Richmond, Virginia last week canceled a reservation for a private event being held by a conservative Christian organization, citing the group's opposition to same-sex marriage and abortion rights. An Instagram post from Metzger Bar and Butchery, a German-influenced restaurant in the Union Hill neighborhood of Richmond, read, quote, "We have always refused service to anyone for making our staff uncomfortable or unsafe, and this was the driving force behind our decision." End of quote. The kitchen of the restaurant is helmed by co-owner Brittney Anderson, a veteran of TV cooking shows including Top Chef and Chopped. The Instagram post continued this way, quote, "Many of our staff are women and or members of the LGBTQ plus community. All of our staff are people with rights who deserve dignity and a safe work environment. We respect our staff's established rights as humans and strive to create a work environment where they can do their jobs with dignity, comfort, and safety." End of quote. The group, the Family Foundation, was set to host a dessert reception for supporters on November 30th, according to the group's president, Victoria Cobb. In a blog post describing the incident, she said that about an hour and a half before the event was slated to start, one of the restaurant's owners called to cancel it. She wrote, quote, "As our vice president of operations explained that guests were arriving at their restaurant shortly, she asked for an explanation. Sure enough, an employee looked up our organization and their wait staff refused to serve us." End of quote. Which is their right to do, folks. This isn't a case of discrimination. Because I know what they're going to say. "Oh, they discriminated against us because of our religion. Oh, we got offended because they don't like our religion." Yeah, that's exactly what I think of that. The Family Foundation is based in Richmond and advocates for policies based on biblical principles. It has lobbied against same-sex marriage and abortion rights. In an interview, Cobb said that since she posted about it, she has heard from people alarmed by the story and from other dining establishments making it clear they would be welcome. Cobb said, quote, "A lot of people are outraged that a restaurant wants to make a litmus test at the door. Everyone should be concerned that people are being denied service based on their politics," end of quote. Well, guess what? Your politics is not a protected class. Sorry there, toots. In her blog post, Cobb likened the restaurant's move to establishments that refused to serve black customers in the 1950s and 60s, and she decried what she called the double standard by liberals who think a Colorado baker should not be allowed to refuse to make a wedding cake for a same-sex couple. Lady, it's not the same goddamn thing! Do you understand that, you dunderhead?
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
That's really how it is. Legal experts say neither of those are apt analogies. While it's illegal to discriminate against someone because of their race or religion, the restaurant's refusal had to do with the group's actions. That is according to Elizabeth Sepper, professor at the University of Texas. She said, quote, "It's about the overall positions and policies the group has taken. It's not about Christian versus non-Christian," end of quote. According to the American Civil Liberties Union, the District of Columbia, Seattle, and the Virgin Islands specifically protect people from being refused service because of their political affiliation or ideology. Reached by phone, Metzger co-owner Kajel Anderson said the owners had no comment beyond the Instagram post. The restaurant and the foundation used interest in the event to fundraise. Metzger on Saturday posted an image of a bourbon-based cocktail dubbed Cracks in the Foundation and said it would donate the profits from its sale to Equality Virginia, a group that advocates for LGBTQ rights. The Instagram post said, quote, "We are so grateful to our many guests and neighbors for their support the past few days. To say thank you, we are donating all proceeds from this cocktail to Equality Virginia tonight," end of quote. And in its blog post describing the incident, the Family Foundation sought donations too. The post read, quote, "Will you consider a donation today to support our efforts to ensure that no Virginian will ever have to worry about being refused a simple meal because of his or her religious beliefs," end of quote. There they go. They're using the religious beliefs argument again. And it's going to be a dead argument, folks. It really is, because that's not what happened. I'm just going to say it right here, folks. I applaud the restaurant for what they did. They needed to not honor that reservation and tell those people, go elsewhere. I'm really sick of people trying to force their views down everybody's throat. The more that this happens, the more that we refuse to do business with them, the better off all of society will be. It's called Popper's Paradox of Tolerance. We're out of time for this week. I'm Darren Gibson. Please support independent media, the First Amendment, and a woman's right to choose.
Stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.